Welcome back to Guiding Bolt Gaming DMs. I'm Jessica, and today I want to share with you guys how to build a cheat sheet for improvising at the game table. I originally found this idea in a Dragon magazine article, and it's helped me a ton at the table. You know how some people are described as being able to make quick, witty comebacks? Yeah, that's not me. But that's okay. I know that thought generation on the fly is not my strong suit. I've identified this personal weakness, and it allows me to better prepare ahead of time. This is where the single-page improv cheat sheet comes in. All DMs know that improvising is part of DMing the game. But I must add that improvisation should not trump pre-game session planning. Let me say that again for those in the back. Improvisation is a necessary part of DMing, but it's not a substitute for planning. You need to know the world you're in and have a good grasp of what's happening in the story. But there will be times when you don't have enough time to plan, this shouldn't be the norm, or your PCs decide to talk to random villager number 5. It happens, and then your improv skills will need to shine through. So, what aren't we talking about today? How to improv. That's a whole nother subject on its own. Instead, we will cover a tool you can create, the cheat sheet, that would help you ad-lib on the fly. So, to get started, grab a piece of notebook paper and fold it in half to create 4 quadrants. As we're walking through suggestions, remember to make the sheet your own. You're building it to assist yourself and help shore up your weaknesses. I'll be doing the same for myself. As we walk through the steps for building your sheet, try not to cram as much as possible onto it. Each quadrant should be easily legible at a quick glance. Write big and don't squish the information together. Okay, let's get started with some options for each of your quadrants. The first quadrant is going to be for names and phrases. Whether you need to quickly throw out the name of a merchant sailor, the forest glen north of town, or the command word for summoning a devil, this section will be your quick reference. Essentially, this quadrant will be a list of made-up words. Feel free to make them up yourself or hit up a fantasy name generator to assist. Honestly, I'm terrible at appropriate names on the fly, so this is one of the most helpful quadrants on my cheat sheet. Tip 1 for this section, remember you have to be able to say these words aloud, so consider pronunciation and how they feel rolling off your tongue. Tip 2, try to pick words that don't already have specific connotations like Matthew or Gandalf, and aim for words that could work for people, places, or things. A good example is Alanwa. You could use it for Lady Alanwa, the Alanwa Forest, or Alanwa, Sword of the Silver Moon. Tip 3, you may need to subdivide this quadrant. Perhaps your world takes place in a setting where elven and orcish settlements meet. I recommend creating 2 separate lists, one of elven sounding words and one for the orc stuff. Tip 4, remember to leave space between the names. This will give you space to jot down a quick note during gameplay of who, what, or where you attach this word to. Let's move on to quadrant 2, which will serve as your bubble map quadrant. Without giving it much forethought, draw 7 to 10 quarter-sized bubbles in this area. Then draw some lines to connect the bubbles in interesting ways. Don't have more than 1 to 2 dead-end bubbles, and don't have a bubble that connects to every other bubble. This bubble grouping can now serve as both a flowchart and a map on the fly. Maybe your PCs unexpectedly drop down into the sewers to escape something that's tailing them, or they might decide to scale down in size and go exploring in a mouse's den or an ant's hill. You now have a map for whatever unforeseen location they've decided to explore. You have the starting structure already in place and will now only need to worry about the contents of the bubbles on the fly. If you fill in the bubbles with various skills or manipulatable elements like pull the lever, then the bubble grouping becomes a flowchart that could apply to a trial handed out from a god or a quest given by a witch or the steps needed to open a magical portal. With the base bubble grouping in front of you, your brain will come up with ways you can use it during gameplay if it's needed, whether that's a family tree or the only safe path through the maze of trials. The third quadrant on our improv cheat sheet is the character notes section. This area will help you ground your improvisation within the ongoing story and capture your players' interests. In this section, you should write each player character's name along with 3 short phrases. The first phrase will be a summary of the character's backstory. For example, on the run after executing the king when forced into slavery. Or, birth was prophesied and blessed by Procan, god of the sea. The second phrase will relate to the present tense through a key like or dislike of the character. This can be epic in scope, like obsessed with the lost dwarven hammer of Grimshaw, or mundane, like hates spiders. The final phrase should focus on the future by specifying a medium to long-term goal of the player. The goal can be rooted in the game world, such as seeks revenge on the Fey wizard that kidnapped her twin sons, or rooted in the game itself, such as desires a holy avenger greatsword. Again, this quadrant won't directly help with your improv, but it will keep what your players want in your peripheral vision. For example, maybe a character is doing some research in the local library. The wizard who's helping them locate what they need reaches up to grab a dusty tome off of the top shelf to reveal a Fey symbol tattoo on their forearm. Your PC whose son was kidnapped were likely just got a lot more interested in that librarian. While none of the quadrants are mandatory and can be anything you want on your sheets, the first 3 quadrant idea outlines tend to be staples on my sheet, while the 4th quadrant tends to vary more. Here are a couple more ideas you can use as the section on your sheet. If you're running a themed campaign that often needs spontaneously written items in a non-English language, use the 4th quadrant space to help you out, whether that's a reminder of what draconic ruin or even Mayan glyphs look like. Another option is to set this section up like a coach. This idea is less directly related to improvising, but again, it can be useful. DMing can be difficult, and sometimes it would be helpful if we had a coach whispering into our ear, making recommendations during sessions. Well, be your own coach with this area. Write down advice, key ideas, or even rule reminders if that's what you need. At one point I had, monsters do more than swing swords on my sheet, and think how true that can be. There can be so much more to combat when I remember and allow my monsters to take actions other than attack. Another piece of advice I've written down is to fail forward. That guidance reminds me that a failed skill check should not halt the game. Consider this scene. I attempt to persuade the mayor of Sir Reverend's innocence. 3. The mayor is unmoved. With that outcome, now what's supposed to happen? That kind of response brings the story to a halt. Now consider the fail forward alternative. I attempt to persuade the mayor of Sir Reverend's innocence. 3. The mayor becomes angry at your continually blatant lack of respect for him and his citizens. You've lost his trust and he exiles you from town. Now that response is a bit more exciting. This gives the party some play. Will they decide to leave town? Have the exiled player sneak around town? Or will they attempt to do something in order to win the mayor's favor back? Write down whatever advice or reminders will help you run a better game session. All in all, remember that your improv cheat sheet is a living thing. There's a good chance you'll need to update it every couple of sessions to refresh new ideas in place of the ones you've already used up. After you use it a few times, you'll get a better sense of which parts are essential for helping you fill in your improv gaps and which parts need to be modified or replaced with new quadrant topics. Either way, you'll have the building blocks you need to better improvise at the game table. In the process of creating your sheet in the first place, will have the ideas already floating around in your mind, making your improvisation come even easier with or without the cheat sheet. What do you plan to put in the quadrants of your cheat sheet? Do you have additional ideas for a quadrant topic? Let's discuss down below in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Until next week, happy gaming!